Question 1. Which of the following describes the process of differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, DRI? A. Reinforcing a behavior that occurs at a lower rate than the target behavior. B. Reinforcing a behavior that cannot occur at the same time as the target behavior. C. Reinforcing any behavior that is not the target behavior. D. Reinforcing a behavior only after a specific time interval has passed without the target behavior. Answer: B. Reinforcing a behavior that cannot occur at the same time as the target behavior. This question is asking about differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, or DRI. The term incompatible is the main clue, meaning the new behavior physically prevents the unwanted behavior from happening. With DRI, you strengthen a desired behavior that makes it impossible for the individual to do the problem behavior simultaneously. For example, if a child habitually bites their nails, reinforcing them for keeping their hands clasped in their lap is an incompatible behavior. Remember, incompatible means the two behaviors literally cannot happen at the same time. Question 2. A behavior analyst wants to increase a client's compliance with instructions. They decide to provide a token, which can be exchanged for preferred items later, immediately after the client follows an instruction. What type of consequence is being used? A. Punishment. B. Negative reinforcement. C. Positive reinforcement. D. Extinction. Answer: C. Positive reinforcement. This question describes the use of positive reinforcement to increase behavior. The key elements are adding something, a token, which is a reinforcer because it's exchanged for preferred items, immediately after a behavior, following instructions, which is intended to increase the likelihood of that behavior happening again. Positive reinforcement involves presenting a stimulus following a behavior to increase the future frequency of that behavior. For instance, giving a child a sticker for cleaning their room makes them more likely to clean their room in the future. Always remember that reinforcement, whether positive or negative, always increases the future likelihood of the behavior it follows. Question 3. Which dimension of behavior refers to the physical shape or form of the behavior? A. Frequency. B. Duration. C. Topography. D. Latency. Answer: C. Topography. This question asks about one of the measurable dimensions of behavior, topography. Topography describes exactly what a behavior looks like or how it appears physically. It's not about how often it happens, frequency, how long it lasts, duration, or how long it takes to start, latency. For instance, the topography of a hand flap might involve rapid up and down movements of the wrist and fingers. The physical description is what topography captures. Question 4. A researcher conducts a study where a treatment is introduced, then withdrawn, and then reintroduced to assess its effect on behavior. What experimental design is being used? A. Multiple baseline design. B. Changing criterion design. C. Reversal design, ABA or ABA. D. Alternating treatments design. Answer: C. Reversal design, ABA or ABAB. This question describes a reversal design, specifically referring to the phases as a baseline, B. Intervention, a withdrawal, and optionally B. Reintroduction. A reversal design demonstrates experimental control by showing that the behavior changes predictably as the intervention is introduced and withdrawn. The core idea is reversing back to baseline conditions after the intervention is applied. For example, measuring hitting, baseline, implementing a reward system for not hitting, intervention, removing the reward system, reversal to baseline, and then re-implementing it, reintroduction. Remember, withdrawal and reintroduction of the intervention are hallmarks of reversal designs. Question 5. Which type of stimulus control involves a stimulus signaling that a behavior will be punished? A. S delta, SD. B. Discriminative stimulus, SD. C. Punishing stimulus, SP. D. Stimulus prompt. Answer: C. Punishing stimulus, SP. This question asks about a stimulus that signals punishment is likely to occur if a specific behavior happens, while an S delta signals that reinforcement is not available, and an SD signals that reinforcement is available. An SP, or SP delta, though often just called SP in this context, is a stimulus that signals that punishment is likely to occur if the behavior happens. For example, seeing a police car, SP, makes it more likely that speeding behavior will be punished. Think of SP as the discriminative stimulus for punishment. Question 6. When conducting a functional behavior assessment, FBA, what is the primary purpose of conducting indirect assessments like interviews and questionnaires? A. To directly observe the behavior in the natural environment. B. To experimentally manipulate variables to test hypotheses. C. To gather information about possible functions of the behavior from those familiar with the individual. D. To measure the topography of the behavior with high precision. Answer: C. To gather information about possible functions of the behavior from those familiar with the individual. This question is about the role of indirect assessments within a functional behavior assessment. Indirect assessments, like interviews with parents, teachers, or the client, and questionnaires, are used to gather information about the behavior from people who know the individual well. They provide hypotheses about the potential triggers, antecedents, and outcomes, consequences, related to the behavior before direct observation or functional analyses are conducted. They are called indirect because they don't involve direct observation of the behavior as it occurs. For instance, asking a parent when and where a behavior usually happens gives clues about its function. Use indirect methods to get started and form ideas about the behavior's purpose. Question 7. A behavior analyst is teaching a client to tie their shoes using backward chaining. What is the first step the analyst will teach and reinforce? A. The first step of tying the shoes. B. The last step of tying the shoes. C. All steps of tying the shoes simultaneously. D. Any step the client finds easiest. Answer: B. The last step of tying the shoes. This question describes backward chaining, a method used to teach complex skills broken down into steps. In backward chaining, the trainer completes all steps of the task except the last one and prompts the learner to do the final step. Once the learner can do the last step independently, the trainer does all steps except the last two, and the learner does the last two, and so on. This continues until the learner can perform the entire chain independently, starting with the last step and working backward. For example, when teaching hand washing, you'd help with all steps except turning off the water, then teach turning off the water, then drying hands and turning off water, and so on. With backward chaining, the learner experiences the natural reinforcement of completing the task sooner because they are taught the end first. Question 8. What is the primary ethical concern when using punishment procedures? A. They are always ineffective. B. They can lead to negative side effects, such as emotional responses, aggression, or avoidance. C. They require less effort than reinforcement procedures. D. They cannot be combined with reinforcement. Answer: B. They can lead to negative side effects, such as emotional responses, aggression, or avoidance. This question focuses on the significant ethical considerations surrounding the use of punishment. While punishment can be effective in decreasing behavior, a major ethical concern is the potential for negative side effects in the client, such as increased aggression, emotional outbursts, escape/avoidance behaviors, or even physical harm depending on the type of punishment. Behavior analysts prioritize reinforcement-based procedures and consider punishment only after less restrictive methods have failed and only with careful safeguards and consideration of these potential side effects. Always remember the ethical guidelines strongly emphasize considering the potential harm and side effects of punishment. Question 9. A behavior occurs and is immediately followed by the removal of a painful stimulus. The future probability of the behavior increases. This is an example of A. Positive reinforcement. B. Negative reinforcement. C. Positive punishment. D. Negative punishment. Answer B. Negative reinforcement. This question describes negative reinforcement. The key components are that a behavior occurs, something is removed, the negative part, in this case, a painful stimulus, and as a result, the behavior increases in the future, the reinforcement part. For example, if pressing a button stops a loud, annoying noise, behavior increases because a stimulus is removed. That's negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is about removing something undesirable to make the behavior more likely to happen again. Question 10. What is the purpose of conducting a stimulus preference assessment? A. To identify the function of a target behavior. B. To determine which stimuli are likely to function as reinforcers. C. To measure the duration of a behavior. D. To teach a new skill. Answer B. To determine which stimuli are likely to function as reinforcers. This question asks about the purpose of a stimulus preference assessment. Preference assessments are procedures used to identify stimuli that an individual is likely to enjoy and therefore might serve as effective reinforcers when presented contingent on a desired behavior. They do not identify the reason a behavior occurs, function, teach new skills, or measure behavior dimensions like duration. For example, presenting a child with different toys and seeing which one they interact with most helps identify preferred items that can be used as rewards. Think of preference assessments as figuring out what someone likes to use as a motivator. Question 11. Which measurement procedure involves counting the number of times a behavior occurs within a specific time period? A. Duration. B. Latency. C. Frequency, or count. D. Interresponse time, IRT. Answer C. Frequency, or count. This question describes the measurement dimension of frequency or count. Frequency is simply the number of times a specific behavior happens. If you also include the time period over which it occurred, it becomes a rate, count per unit of time. It differs from duration, how long, latency, time to start, and IRT, time between responses. For instance, counting how many times a student raises their hand during a 30-minute lesson is measuring the frequency. Frequency measurement answers how many times did it happen. Question 12. A behavior analyst is explaining a concept to a student. They physically guide the student's hands to perform the correct action. What type of prompt is this? A. Gestural prompt. B. Verbal prompt. C. Model prompt. D. Physical prompt. Answer D. Physical prompt. This question asks about a specific type of prompt used to assist a learner in performing a behavior. Physically guiding the learner's hands to complete an action is a direct physical manipulation. A gestural prompt involves pointing or nodding, a verbal prompt involves telling them what to do, and a model prompt involves showing them how to do it. Providing physical guidance is the most intrusive type of prompt, as it directly helps the body perform the action. Question 13. What is the primary difference between reinforcing a behavior on a continuous reinforcement schedule, CRF, versus an intermittent reinforcement schedule, INT? A. CRF is used for maintaining behavior, while INT is used for teaching new behavior. B. CRF provides reinforcement for every occurrence of the behavior, while INT provides reinforcement only sometimes. C. CRF results in slower acquisition but is resistant to extinction, while INT results in faster acquisition but is less resistant to extinction. D. CRF is used with punishment, while INT is used with reinforcement. Answer B. CRF provides reinforcement for every occurrence of the behavior, while INT provides reinforcement only sometimes. This question asks about the fundamental difference between continuous and intermittent schedules of reinforcement. Continuous reinforcement, CRF, means every single time the target behavior occurs, it receives reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement, INT, on the other hand, means the behavior is reinforced only occasionally, based on some schedule, like every few responses, or after a certain amount of time. CRF is typically used when first teaching a new behavior to establish it quickly, while INT is used once the behavior is learned to maintain it and make it more resistant to extinction. The key distinction is the frequency of reinforcement relative to the behavior occurrence. Question 14. A client typically screams when asked to do challenging tasks. The scream results in the task being removed. This suggests the function of the screaming behavior is likely: A. Attention. B. Tangible. C. Escape. D. Automatic. Answer: C. Escape. This question describes a scenario strongly suggesting an escape function for the screaming behavior. The core pattern is that the behavior, screaming, occurs in the presence of an antecedent, challenging task, and the consequence is the removal of that aversive stimulus, task removed, leading to the behavior increasing in the future under similar conditions. Escape-maintained behavior happens because it allows the individual to avoid or get away from something unpleasant. If a behavior gets someone out of doing something they don't want to do, it's likely escape-maintained. Question 15. Which ethical code requires behavior analysts to prioritize the welfare and rights of their clients? A. Only the section on responsible conduct. B. This is not explicitly stated in the ethics code. C. This is a foundational principle woven throughout the ethics code. D. Only applies to clients with certain diagnoses. Answer: C. This is a foundational principle woven throughout the ethics code. This question addresses a core ethical principle in behavior analysis. Prioritizing the welfare and rights of the client is not confined to one section. It's a guiding principle that underlies all ethical standards for behavior analysts. Every decision, assessment, intervention, and interaction must be made with the client's best interests and rights at the forefront. The ethical code emphasizes client dignity, informed consent, and promoting independence, all reflecting this core commitment. Client welfare is central to everything a behavior analyst does ethically. Question 16. When conducting a functional analysis, what does the condition labeled alone typically assess the possibility of? A. Attention as a reinforcer. B. Escape as a reinforcer. C. Tangible items as a reinforcer. D. Automatic reinforcement. Answer: D. Automatic reinforcement. This question refers to one of the standard conditions in a functional analysis. The alone condition is designed to test for automatic reinforcement. In this condition, the individual is alone in a low stimulation environment with no social interaction, tasks, or tangible items contingent on the behavior. If the behavior occurs frequently in this condition, it suggests the behavior is maintained by consequences that are produced by the behavior itself, without social mediation, automatic reinforcement. This might include behaviors that feel good or provide sensory stimulation. Question 17. A behavior analyst is teaching a child to imitate actions. The analyst models touching their nose, and the child is reinforced for touching their nose. The analyst then models clapping hands, and the child is reinforced for clapping hands. This procedure is an example of teaching. A. Shaping. B. Discrimination training. C. Imitation. D. Differential reinforcement. Answer: C. Imitation. This question describes a procedure specifically designed to teach imitation. Imitation is a behavior that has the same form as the model stimulus and is under the control of the model. The process involves providing a model, touching nose, clapping hands, and reinforcing the learner for engaging in the same behavior. While discrimination and differential reinforcement are involved in reinforcing correct imitations and not incorrect ones, the overall objective and procedure described is teaching the skill of imitation itself. Teaching imitation involves presenting a model and reinforcing matching responses. Question 18. What is the definition of a discriminative stimulus, SD? A. A stimulus that signals that a response will be punished. B. A stimulus that evokes a response because it has been reinforced in its presence. C. A stimulus that decreases the future probability of a behavior. D. A stimulus that occurs after a behavior. Answer. B. A stimulus that evokes a response because it has been reinforced in its presence. This question asks for the definition of a discriminative stimulus, or SD. An SD is a stimulus that, when present, signals that a particular response is likely to be reinforced. Behavior occurs more often in the presence of an SD than in its absence because of this reinforcement history. For example, a red stop sign, SD, signals that pressing the brake pedal is the behavior likely to be reinforced by not getting in an accident or ticket. An SD is a signal that reinforcement is available for a specific behavior. Question 19. The process of reinforcing successive approximations to a target behavior is known as A. Chaining. B. Fading. C. Shaping. D. Prompting. Answer. C. Shaping. This question describes shaping, a process used to teach new behaviors that are not currently in the individual's repertoire. Shaping involves differentially reinforcing behaviors that are progressively closer in form to the desired target behavior. While putting previous approximations on extinction, you start by reinforcing something vaguely similar to the goal, then only reinforce behaviors that are a bit closer, and so on. For instance, shaping a child to say water might involve first reinforcing any sound, then wa, then wada, and finally water. Shaping slowly molds an existing behavior into a new one by rewarding closer and closer tries. Question 20. When graphically displaying behavior data, what does the y-axis typically represent? A. Time. B. Phase changes, example baseline, intervention. C. The level of the behavior being measured. D. Sessions or observations. Answer. C. The level of the behavior being measured. This question is about the standard way to plot behavior data on a graph. In a typical line graph used in ABA, the y-axis, the vertical axis, always represents the quantitative dimension of the behavior being measured, such as frequency, duration, percentage, etc. The x-axis, the horizontal axis, typically represents time, sessions, or observation periods. Phase changes are indicated by vertical lines on the graph. The y-axis shows how much the behavior is happening. Question 21. A behavior analyst discovers that a colleague has acted unethically. According to the ethics code, what is the behavior analyst's first step? A. Immediately report the colleague to the certifying board. B. Attempt to resolve the issue informally with the colleague if possible and appropriate. C. Ignore the behavior if it does not directly harm the client. D. Discuss the issue with the client's parents. Answer. B. Attempt to resolve the issue informally with the colleague if possible and appropriate. This question relates to the ethical responsibility of behavior analysts when witnessing unethical conduct by colleagues. The ethics code generally requires that if an informal resolution appears appropriate and the potential harm is not substantial, the first step should be to attempt to resolve the issue directly with the colleague. Reporting to the board or other authorities is typically considered after informal attempts fail or when the unethical conduct is significant and likely to cause substantial harm. Discussing it with the client's family is a breach of confidentiality unless relevant to their case. The first step, when feasible and safe, is usually direct communication with the colleague. Question 22. What is the process called when a previously reinforced behavior is no longer reinforced, resulting in a decrease in the future frequency of that behavior? A. Punishment. B. Extinction. C. Response cost. D. Timeout. Answer. B. Extinction. This question describes the behavioral process of extinction. Extinction occurs when reinforcement for a previously reinforced behavior is withheld, leading to a gradual decrease in the rate of that behavior over time. Unlike punishment, which involves adding or removing a stimulus to decrease behavior, extinction involves removing the maintaining consequence. For instance, if a child's crying was previously reinforced by parental attention, and the parents stop giving attention to the crying is on extinction. Extinction is essentially ignoring the behavior's payoff. Question 23. A behavior analyst is teaching a client to ask for a preferred toy. The analyst holds up the toy and immediately says, "toy." The client is reinforced for saying toy. What verbal operant is the analyst teaching? A. Tact. B. Mand. C. Etrok. D. Intraverbal. Answer. C. Echoic. This question describes teaching an echoic behavior. An echoic is a verbal response that is evoked by a spoken verbal stimulus and has point-to-point correspondence and formal similarity with the stimulus, meaning it sounds like the stimulus. The analyst says toy, and the client repeats toy, and this matching is reinforced. This is different from a mand, asking for something, a tact, labeling something, or an intraverbal, responding to conversation or questions. Repeating what someone else says is an echoic. Question 24. Which type of measurement involves recording whether a behavior occurred at any point during a specific interval? A. Momentary time sampling. B. Partial interval recording. C. Whole interval recording. D. Duration recording. Answer. B. Partial interval recording. This question describes partial interval recording. In partial interval recording, the observer marks the behavior as occurring if it happens at any point within the designated interval, even if it's just for a second. This method is often used for behaviors that don't occur for long periods and might overestimate the total duration or frequency. Momentary time sampling records if it occurs only at the very end of the interval, and whole interval recording records if it occurs throughout the entire interval. Partial interval answers if the behavior happened at all during the interval. Question 25. A behavior analyst is using a token economy. The tokens are considered what type of reinforcer? A. Primary reinforcer. B. Conditioned reinforcer. C. Unconditioned reinforcer. D. Automatic reinforcer. Answer. B. Conditioned reinforcer. This question asks about the type of reinforcer tokens represent in a token economy. Tokens themselves don't have inherent reinforcing value, like food or water, but they acquire reinforcing properties by being paired with primary or other already established conditioned reinforcers, like toys, privileges, etc. Because their value is learned through association with other reinforcers, tokens are considered conditioned, or secondary, reinforcers. Primary/unconditioned reinforcers are naturally reinforcing without prior learning. Tokens become reinforcing because they allow access to other reinforcers. Question 26. What is the potential ethical issue if a behavior analyst continues services with a client when they are experiencing a personal crisis that impairs their effectiveness? A. Multiple relationships. B. Conflict of interest. C. Impaired professional judgment. D. Confidentiality breach. Answer. C. Impaired professional judgment. This question highlights the ethical requirement for behavior analysts to practice within their competence and avoid providing services when their judgment is compromised. If a personal crisis is impacting the analyst's ability to think clearly, make sound decisions, or implement procedures effectively, it falls under the category of impaired professional judgment. The ethics code requires analysts to refrain from providing services when their ability is compromised and to seek professional consultation or assistance. Providing services while impaired risks harming the client. Question 27. When conducting a skill acquisition program using discrete trial training, ETT, what is the typical consequence delivered immediately after a correct response? A. Presentation of the next trial. B. A brief break. C. Reinforcement. D. Ignoring the response. Answer: C. Reinforcement. This question refers to the standard procedure following a correct response in discrete trial training, DTT. DTT involves presenting a clear antecedent, like an instruction or stimulus, prompting if needed, waiting for the client's response, and then providing an immediate consequence. For a correct response, the consequence is typically reinforcement, praise, token, preferred item, to increase the likelihood of that correct response occurring again. This immediate reinforcement is crucial for learning in DTT. Correct responses in DTT earn reinforcement. Question 28. What is the definition of a target behavior? A. Any behavior exhibited by the client. B. A behavior selected for change, increase or decrease. C. Only behaviors that are problematic. D. A behavior that the parent wants to see less often. Answer: B. A behavior selected for change, increase or decrease. This question asks for the definition of a target behavior in ABA. A target behavior is simply the specific behavior that has been chosen to be the focus of the intervention, meaning the behavior you are aiming to either increase or decrease. It can be a skill deficit you want to increase, like saying words, or a challenging behavior you want to decrease, like aggression. It's the behavior you are specifically tracking and trying to change. Question 29. Which component of a behavior plan describes the strategies used to prevent the behavior from occurring? A. Consequence strategies. B. Replacement behaviors. C. Antecedent strategies. D. Measurement procedures. Answer: C. Antecedent strategies. This question asks about the part of a behavior intervention plan focused on preventing the behavior. Antecedent strategies, or proactive strategies, are interventions implemented before the behavior occurs to make it less likely. These involve modifying the environment or triggers associated with the behavior. Examples include providing choices, pre-teaching skills, or modifying tasks. Consequence strategies are what happens after the behavior, while replacement behaviors are alternative skills taught. Antecedent strategies are about changing what happens before to prevent the problem. Question 30. A behavior analyst uses a standard protocol for teaching hand washing to multiple clients with similar skill deficits. This demonstrates which characteristic of ABA. A. Analytic. B. Technological. C. Effective. D. Conceptually systematic. Answer: B. Technological. This question describes the characteristic of ABA known as technological. Technological means that the procedures are described clearly, precisely, and completely enough that a trained reader could replicate the procedure exactly, using a standard, written protocol that others can follow precisely to implement the hand-washing program ensures that the intervention can be consistently applied by different people. If someone else can read your plan and do exactly what you did, it's technological. Question 31. What does the acronym ABC stand for in behavior analysis? A. Ability, behavior, consequence. B. Antecedent, behavior, consequence. C. Action, baseline, change. D. Analysis, baseline, consequence. Answer: B. Antecedent, behavior, consequence. This question asks about the standard three-term contingency, represented by the acronym ABC. This is a fundamental concept in ABA for understanding behavior. A stands for antecedent, what happens immediately before the behavior. B stands for behavior, what the person says or does, and C stands for consequence, what happens immediately after the behavior. Analyzing the ABC relationship helps determine the function of the behavior. Thinking in terms of ABC helps break down why a behavior is happening. Question 32. A supervisor asks a supervisee to record data on a new behavior. The supervisee is unsure how to define or measure the behavior. What ethical responsibility does the supervisor have? A. To tell the supervisee to figure it out themselves. B. To provide training and clear instructions on how to collect the data accurately. C. To assign the task to someone else. D. To ignore the supervisee's lack of understanding. Answer. B. To provide training and clear instructions on how to collect the data accurately. This question relates to the ethical responsibilities of supervision. Supervisors are ethically obligated to provide appropriate training and oversight to their supervisees, ensuring they are competent to perform the tasks assigned. If a supervisee doesn't understand how to measure a behavior, the supervisor must provide clear instruction, modeling, and practice opportunities to ensure data collection is accurate and reliable. Supervisors are responsible for ensuring their supervisees have the necessary skills to perform their duties ethically and effectively. Question 33. What is the definition of response generalization? A. When a behavior occurs in the presence of stimuli that are different from the training stimuli. B. When a behavior occurs in the presence of the same stimulus as used in training. C. When a behavior decreases in frequency across different settings. D. When the form of the behavior changes but its function remains the same. Answer. A. When a behavior occurs in the presence of stimuli that are different from the training stimuli. This question defines stimulus generalization. Stimulus generalization occurs when a behavior that has been reinforced in the presence of one stimulus. The ST also occurs in the presence of other stimuli that share some physical characteristics with the original SD. For example, if a child learns to say doggy when seeing their pet dog, and then says doggy when seeing different types of dogs, pictures of dogs, or even cats, that's stimulus generalization. The response stays the same, but it happens across different situations or stimuli. Question 34. A behavior analyst decides to use a punishment procedure. According to ethical guidelines, what must also be included in the intervention plan? A. A plan for differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors. B. Only reinforcement procedures, no punishment. C. A plan to gradually increase the intensity of the punishment. D. A rationale for why punishment is less restrictive than other procedures. Answer. A. A plan for differential reinforcement of alternative behaviors. This question addresses an ethical requirement when using punishment. Ethical guidelines and best practice require that if punishment is used to decrease a behavior, the intervention must also include procedures for teaching and reinforcing appropriate alternative behaviors. Simply suppressing a behavior with punishment is not sufficient. You must teach the individual what to do instead. Using punishment ethically means pairing it with reinforcement for desired behaviors. Question 35. When a behavior analyst defines a behavior, it must be objective, clear, and complete. This is known as an A. Operational definition. B. Functional assessment. C. Hypothesis statement. D. Intervention plan. Answer. A. Operational definition. This question describes the key characteristics of an operational definition in behavior analysis. An operational definition defines a behavior in observable and measurable terms, clear enough that two independent observers could agree on whether or not the behavior occurred. It should describe the topography of the behavior, its onset and offset, and any examples or non-examples. This clarity is essential for accurate measurement and consistent implementation. An operational definition makes the behavior measurable and objective for everyone involved. Question 36. What is the primary purpose of extinction bursts? A. They signal the effectiveness of the extinction procedure. B. They show the behavior is increasing due to reinforcement. C. They indicate the behavior is now under stimulus control. D. They demonstrate that punishment is needed. Answer. A. They signal the effectiveness of the extinction procedure. This question asks about extinction bursts, a common temporary side effect when extinction is implemented. An extinction burst is a sudden temporary increase in the rate, intensity, or variability of a behavior immediately after extinction is put into effect. While challenging, an extinction burst is actually an indicator that you have successfully identified and withheld the maintaining reinforcer, suggesting the extinction procedure is working as expected. It's a temporary bump before the behavior starts to decrease. Seeing the behavior get worse temporarily can mean the extinction plan is on the right track. Question 37. Which term refers to the elapsed time from the presentation of a stimulus, like an instruction, to the initiation of a response? A. Duration. B. Frequency. C. Latency. D. Interresponse time, IRT. Answer. C. Latency. This question defines latency as a dimension of behavior. Latency is the measure of time between the onset of a stimulus, the antecedent, and the start of the behavior. It answers the question, how long does it take the person to start the behavior after the signal? For example, if you tell someone to sit down and it takes them 5 seconds to begin the movement, the latency is 5 seconds. Latency measures the time delay before the behavior begins. Question 38. A student is taught to greet their teacher by saying hi. They then start saying hi to other adults at school without specific training to do so. This is an example of A. Response generalization. B. Stimulus generalization. C. Discrimination. D. Response differentiation. Answer. B. Stimulus generalization. This question describes stimulus generalization. The learned behavior, saying hi, is occurring in the presence of new, untrained stimuli, other adults, that are similar to the original training stimulus, the teacher. The response remains the same, hi, but it generalizes to new situations or people. Response generalization would involve the student using different greetings. Hello, hey. In the original setting, here, the stimulus changes, but the response is the same. Question 39. Which ethical consideration requires behavior analysts to make database decisions and modify interventions based on client progress? A. Maintaining confidentiality. B. Using evidence-based practices. C. Responsible conduct of research. D. Avoiding harmful contingencies. Answer. B. Using evidence-based practices. This question relates to the ethical guideline about using evidence-based practices and making database decisions. Behavior analysts are required to use assessment and intervention procedures that have scientific support and are appropriate for the client. This includes continuously collecting data to monitor client progress and making changes to the intervention based on that data to ensure effectiveness and efficiency. Decisions should always be guided by objective data, not assumptions. Question 40. A behavior analyst is teaching a child to build a tower of blocks. They reinforce the child for putting one block on another, then for putting a third block on, and so on, reinforcing each step in order until the tower is complete. What procedure is being used? A. Shaping. B. Total task chaining. C. Forward chaining. D. Backward chaining. Answer. C. Forward chaining. This question describes forward chaining. In forward chaining, the steps of a task are taught in their natural order, starting with the first step. The learner is prompted and reinforced for completing the first step, and once mastered, they are taught the first 2 steps, then the first three, and so on, building the chain from beginning to end. The analyst is reinforcing successful completion of steps, starting from the initial action of putting one block on another. Forward chaining teaches the task from the beginning step to the end. Question 41. What is the primary difference between interval recording and event recording methods, like frequency or duration? A. Interval recording measures behaviors that happen at a specific point in time, while event recording measures continuous behaviors. B. Interval recording breaks observation time into intervals, while event recording counts or times discrete occurrences of behavior. C. Interval recording is used only for increasing behaviors, while event recording is used only for decreasing behaviors. D. Interval recording is less accurate than event recording. Answer. B. Interval recording breaks observation time into intervals, while event recording counts or times discrete occurrences of behavior. This question asks about the basic distinction between interval recording and event recording. Event recording methods like frequency, counting each instance, and duration, timing how long each instance lasts, measure discrete occurrences or the total time of the behavior directly. Interval recording, however, divides the observation period into small intervals and records whether the behavior occurred within or at the end of those intervals, depending on the specific method, providing an estimate rather than an exact count or duration. Interval recording is about checking for behavior within time blocks. Question 42. What is the ethical standard related to avoiding conflicts of interest? A. Behavior analysts must never accept gifts from clients. B. Behavior analysts must prioritize their own financial gain over the client's welfare. C. Behavior analysts must avoid situations where personal, financial, or other interests could impair their objectivity or lead to exploitation. D. Conflicts of interest are unavoidable and do not need to be addressed. Answer. C. Behavior analysts must avoid situations where personal, financial, or other interests could impair their objectivity or lead to exploitation. This question addresses the ethical requirement to avoid conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest arises when a behavior analyst's judgment or actions could be improperly influenced by a secondary interest, like personal relationships or financial gain, rather than solely focusing on the client's best interest. The ethics code requires behavior analysts to be vigilant in identifying and avoiding situations that could lead to compromised objectivity or exploitation of the client or supervisee. Maintaining professional boundaries helps avoid conflicts of interest. Question 43. A behavior intervention plan specifies that reinforcement should be delivered within 1 second of the target behavior occurring. This refers to the principle of A. Stimulus control. B. Behavioral contrast. C. Immediacy of reinforcement. D. Response differentiation. Answer. C. Immediacy of reinforcement. This question highlights the importance of the immediacy of reinforcement for learning to be most effective, especially when teaching new behaviors or working with individuals who have difficulty with delayed gratification. The reinforcer should be delivered as quickly as possible after the target behavior occurs. The closer in time the consequence is to the behavior, the clearer the relationship is to the learner. Delaying reinforcement can make it less effective or accidentally reinforce other behaviors that occurred during the delay. Immediate reinforcement makes the connection between behavior and reward clear. Question 44. When implementing an intervention, if the behavior analyst notices that a previously suppressed behavior is now occurring more frequently in a different setting, where the intervention is not being implemented, this is likely an example of A. Spontaneous recovery. B. Behavioral contrast. C. Generalization. D. Punishment side effect. Answer. B. Behavioral contrast. This question describes behavioral contrast. Behavioral contrast occurs when a change in the rate of a behavior in one setting leads to an opposite change in the rate of the same behavior in another setting. For example, if a behavior is put on extinction in therapy, decreasing there, it might increase in frequency at home, where it is still being reinforced or not on extinction. It's like the behavior bounces back or increases elsewhere when suppressed in one place. Question 45. What is the definition of a motivating operation, MO? A. A stimulus that signals the availability of reinforcement. B. A consequence that increases the future frequency of a behavior. C. An environmental variable that alters the effectiveness of a reinforcer and alters the frequency of behavior reinforced by that reinforcer. D. A procedure used to teach a new skill. Answer: C. An environmental variable that alters the effectiveness of a reinforcer and alters the frequency of behavior reinforced by that reinforcer. This question asks for the definition of a motivating operation, MO. An MO is an environmental event, stimulus, or condition that affects the value of a reinforcer, making it more or less desirable, and influences the frequency of behaviors that have been reinforced by that reinforcer in the past. For example, being deprived of water for a long time, an MO, makes water more reinforcing and increases behaviors like asking for water. Most change what you want and how hard you'll work to get it. Question 46. A behavior analyst is conducting a supervision session with a trainee. The trainee asks for advice on a specific client case. The supervisor provides guidance based on their expertise and directs the trainee on how to proceed ethically and effectively. This is an example of the supervisor engaging in A. Multiple relationship. B. Providing feedback and reinforcement. C. Delegating tasks. D. Exploitation. Answer: B. Providing feedback and reinforcement. This question describes a core function of effective supervision, providing guidance, feedback, and support. The supervisor is responding to the trainee's need for direction on a client case by offering advice based on their knowledge. This interaction, where the supervisor provides instruction and potentially reinforces correct application of principles, is part of the feedback and reinforcement loop essential for trainee development. Supervisors teach and guide their trainees through providing feedback and reinforcement. Question 47. What is the primary ethical principle that guides the selection of intervention strategies? A. Using the least expensive intervention. B. Selecting the intervention preferred by the parent, regardless of effectiveness. C. Using the least restrictive, most effective intervention. D. Selecting only punishment-based interventions. Answer: C. Using the least restrictive, most effective intervention. This question highlights the ethical mandate regarding intervention selection. The principle of using the least restrictive but most effective procedures. This means behavior analysts should first consider and try interventions that are less intrusive or limit client choice less, while still being likely to produce significant and durable behavior change. Punishment and highly restrictive procedures are considered only after less restrictive options have been attempted and found ineffective, and only if justified by the severity of the behavior. Always aim for the simplest effective solution first. Question 48. When reviewing data, a behavior analyst notices a clear upward trend in the target skill example, saying words. What does this trend likely indicate? A. The behavior intervention is likely effective. B. The behavior intervention is likely ineffective. C. Measurement is inconsistent. D. The behavior is on extinction. Answer: A. The behavior intervention is likely effective. This question is about interpreting data trends on a behavior graph. An upward trend line for a skill you are trying to increase suggests that the intervention or teaching procedure implemented during that phase is likely having the desired effect, meaning the skill is increasing over time. Conversely, a downward trend for a skill would suggest the intervention is not effective or potentially harmful. An upward trend for a desired behavior is usually a sign that things are working. Question 49. What is the main purpose of collecting baseline data? A. To demonstrate experimental control. B. To provide a reference point for evaluating the effects of the intervention. C. To implement the intervention more easily. D. To determine the function of the behavior. Answer: B. To provide a reference point for evaluating the effects of the intervention. This question asks about the critical role of baseline data. Baseline data is collected before any intervention is introduced to show the natural rate or level of the target behavior under existing conditions. This provides a standard against which to compare the behavior rate during and after the intervention. Without baseline data, it's impossible to scientifically determine if the intervention caused any observed changes in the behavior. Baseline shows you what's happening before you do anything, so you know if your intervention made a difference. Question 50. Which philosophical assumption in behavior analysis states that the universe is a lawful and orderly place in which all phenomena occur as the result of other events? A. Empiricism. B. Parsimony. C. Determinism. D. Pragmatism. Answer: C. Determinism. This question refers to determinism, one of the foundational philosophical assumptions of behavior analysis. Determinism is the assumption that all events, including behavior, are caused by other events and do not occur randomly. Behavior analysts assume that behavior is determined by environmental and genetic factors, and is therefore predictable and controllable, which is the basis for scientific analysis and intervention. Determinism is the belief that behavior is caused, not random, making it a subject for scientific study.